Censored is a publication that examines the stories that are generally ignored or censored by the news media. It just put out a list of the top 25 stories that the media did not cover this year. And we're happy to report that we here on the News with Rick Sanchez covered, or actually featured, more than half of those stories that they say weren't covered by other guys on our newscast. But there's one story in particular that made the list of all the stories ignored by the media that we want to tell you about. This is a story that we not only covered, I mean, we actually got into a public feud with the New York Times over our coverage of this story. So what's the story? It's a question of 5G and whether 5G may actually pose a health risk. The correspondent who led our coverage on this story is none other than Michelle Greenstein, who's here now to follow up on this story. This should make you feel pretty good that here comes, this magazine essentially saying these stories should have been covered and weren't. You covered it. You led the way.
Right. And Project Censored really does a great service by listing these stories that are kind of redacted from the mainstream corporate press. They listed this 5G health concern story as number 12 on their list. But today we're learning, as of just yesterday, a broad coalition of scientists, doctors, and otherwise advocates of a national 5G revolution sent a letter to President Donald Trump demanding a moratorium on 5G wireless infrastructure until the potential hazards for both human health and the environment have been fully investigated by actual scientists. Now, according to this 5G resolution, the FCC says over 800,000 antenna sites will be needed to fully deploy 5G to the U.S. And in terms of global deployments, they're expected to reach almost 5 million just by next year. Now, what they're saying is that 5G will dramatically increase the public's daily exposure to the radio frequency electromagnetic fields that we already have, but in addition to that, we will have even higher wavelengths of exposure. Now, they're also saying that 5G was not pre-market safety tested, and research shows that 5G has biological effects on human, bees, trees, and the environment. So they're saying that it is not safe, given the science that we already know.
You know what I want to do for our viewers? I want to make this as, because I've had a hard time understanding this story because I'm just not that bright. But the story as I see it is the fact that they're actually going to put pieces of hardware, like little mini towers, mini antennas, all over the place.
Right.
And there are going to be so many of them that we can't help but be in their midst all the time. And they have to put out at least some level of radiation.
Right, and even in the very short term, it'll be impossible to escape yourself from this kind of radiation exposure, especially if you live in a big city. Just by walking out on the street, you'll see things like this. In many cities, you're seeing AT&T and other wireless providers actually disguising these 5G cell towers, like you can see as a cactus here or a palm tree there.
That's a cell tower.
Those are all cell towers. Isn't that funny? But I think you actually don't have to be that bright to understand this story. I'm glad you brought that up because I would draw the parallel with what happened with the tobacco industry, right? Scientists who were showing the harmful effects of tobacco, they struggled with media attention, they were discredited, they struggled with getting funding, and their research was really only widely accepted after the sickness and death was so widespread that it was undeniable, right? So you could even say that the 5G industry, the wireless industry, is actually making the tobacco industry look like amateurs. In fact, a scientist and doctor named Deborah Davis said just that. She said that what tobacco did is nothing compared to what the wireless industry does today. And you know what's really interesting? The National Institute of Occupational Safety and Health, the Department of Health, the EPA, all of these organizations once did research on wireless radiation, but not anymore, and that's 100% due to pressure from the industry.
And now back to the story about why these stories aren't told and aren't covered. Why aren't the stories like the one that you and I are having a discussion about right now? And by the way, nobody's saying we shouldn't move forward, technology's bad. We're just saying we should make sure it's safe before we move forward, right? But why isn't it being covered?
Well, there's a number of factors here. Of course, you have to look at who owns and operates the media. I mean, you're talking about these telecom companies that are literally the same companies that own and operate the major corporate networks. So that aspect of it.
And let me just say, and the biggest, most, and the richest companies in the world.
Exactly, but they have everything to lose and nothing to gain from covering health effects of their own technology. So it would be very interesting if they did, go with some full-throated coverage of 5G wireless radiation effects. But of course, it's not just the United States government ignoring these health hazards. I mean, it's not a mystery as to why the U.S. corporate media is, right? They have lots of conflicts of interest there. But then in terms of the government, in theory, they're supposed to be, working in favor of the public. These are supposed to be the agencies regulating these corporations. In terms of that, there's a lot of conflicts of interest there as well. So, I mean, you could only look at the latest example. We had Ajit Pai, the head of the Federal Communications Commission, the agency that's supposed to be regulating the wireless industry. He came from Verizon, and that's just the very latest example.
Interlocking, as we like to say.
Interlocking,
we see it
revolving door.
Yeah. Hey, Michelle, good stuff.
Thank you.
Really. I mean, you deserve kudos, not just for today, but your general coverage on the story all the way around.
Very important.